واعتدلوا استقيموا يرحمكم الله. الله أكبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين. وقالوا هذه أنعام وحرث الحجر لا يطعمها إلا من نشاء بزعمهم وأنعام حرمت ظهورها وأنعام لا يذكرون اسم الله عليها افتراء عليه سيجزيهم بما كانوا يفترون. وقالوا ما في بطون هذه الأنعام خالصة لذكورنا ومحرم على أزواجنا وإن يكن ميتة فهم فيه شركاء سيجزيهم وصفهم إنه حكيم عليم. قد خسر الذين قتلوا أولادهم سفها بغير علم وحرموا ما رزقهم الله افتراء على الله قد ضلوا وما كانوا مهتدين. وهو الذي أنشأ جنات معروشات وغير معروشات والنخل والزرع مختلفا أكله والزيتون والرمان متشابها وغير متشابه كلوا من ثمره إذا أثمر وآتوا حقه يوم حصاده ولا تسرفوا إنه لا يحب المسرفين. ومن الأنعام حمولة وفرشا كلوا مما رزقكم الله ولا تتبعوا خطوات الشيطان إنه لكم عدو مبين. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين. 8 أزواج من الضأن 2 ومن المعز 2 قل الذكرين حرم أم الأنثيين أم اشتملت عليه أرحام الأنثيين نبئوني بعلم إن كنتم صادقين. ومن الإبل 2 ومن البقر 2 قل الذكرين حرم أم الأنثيين أم اشتملت عليه أرحام الأنثيين أم كنتم شهداء إذ وصاكم الله بهذا فمن أظلم ممن افترى على الله كذبا ليضل الناس بغير علم إن الله لا يهدي القوم الظالمين قل لا أجد فيما أوحي إلي محرما على طاعم يطعمه إلا أن يكون ميتة أو دما مصفوحا أو لحم خنزير فإنه رجس أو فسقا أحل لغير الله به فمن اضطر غير باغ ولا عاد فإن ربك غفور رحيم وعلى الذين هادوا حرمنا كل ذي ظفر ومن البقر والغنم حرمنا عليهم شحومهما إلا ما حملت ظهورهما أو الحوايا أو ما اختلط بعظم ذلك جزيناهم ببغيهم وإنا لصادقون الله أكبر سمع الله لمن حمده الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر السلام عليكم ورحمة الله السلام عليكم ورحمة الله
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه ومن استنى بسنته إلى يوم الدين. اللهم اجعلنا منهم ومن الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر آمين يا رب العالمين. فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم وقالوا هذه أنعام وحرث حجر لا يطعمها إلا من نشاء بزعمهم وأنعام حرمت ظهورها وأنعام لا يذكرون اسم الله عليها افتراء عليه سيجزيهم بما كانوا يفترون. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي اللهم ثبتنا عند الموت بلا إله إلا الله. Today inshallah we're going to kind of take a survey look at a number of ayat that Luqman started reciting today from 138 of Surah Al-An'am. And this is probably one of the most comprehensive places in the Quran to describe the principle of halal and haram, and the principles of what Allah made permissible and the principles of what Allah made impermissible. It's also a really powerful place to understand how religions become corrupt, like what Allah reveals originally becomes corrupted over time and the truth gets mixed with falsehood. And one of the places where truth gets mixed with falsehood is in fact the area of halal and haram. You would think normally that people want to take the haram and they want to make it halal. That's what people want to do. But actually Allah describes here that the people that had lost the teachings of Ibrahim alayhi salam and mixed it with a lot of mythologies over the centuries in Arabia, they took a lot of haram and made it halal, and they took a lot of halal and made it haram. They actually did it both ways, and both are crimes against Allah. If Allah has made something permissible, it is a crime against Allah for anyone to consider it impermissible. And the same way, if Allah has made something impermissible, it is a crime against Allah. How dare you declare something lawful that Allah made unlawful? The lawgiver is Allah Azza wa Jal, right? So this is a passage that kind of outlines that. But the piece of this conversation that I want to share with you is that Allah went out of His way. You would think Allah will describe in the Quran, like in Surah Al-Ma'idah, the surah before this one, Allah is very specific about what kinds of animals are halal for us to eat, and the process by which we can have an animal, and which categories of women are acceptable for a believer to marry. Like those kinds of things are outlined very specifically in Surah Al-Ma'idah, the 5th surah. We're in the 6th surah now, which is a Makki surah. It's earlier. Ma'idah was one of the last surahs revealed, if not the last. An'am is a Makki surah. And here Allah is describing in great detail the made-up sharia of the mushrikeen. So the actual sharia of Allah is in Surah Al-Ma'idah, and this made-up fantasy sharia of the mushrikeen, where they made up their own halal and haram. I started wondering when I first studied this, why is Allah talking about their laws with so much detail? Because He actually spent quite a few ayat, from 138 onwards. If you read the Arabic or you read the English translation, you're going to see Allah went out of His way to describe, for example, I'm just going to read 138. وَقَالُوا هَذِهِ أَنْعَامٌ وَحَرْثٌ حِجْرٌ لَا يَطْعَمُهَا إِلَّا مَن نَشَاءُ. They said, these specific cows, these sheep, these cattle, and this section of the farm, this crop, hijr, this is impermissible. You can't touch that. لَا يَطْعَمُهَا إِلَّا مَن نَشَاءُ. Nobody can eat that except the ones we want. Meaning there are certain holy people or certain categories of people, only they can eat these animals and this food. وَأَنْعَامٌ حُرِّمَتْ ظُهُورُهَا. And then they said, oh, certain animals, you can eat it, except the meat on its back, you can't eat that. وَأَنْعَامٌ لَا يَذْكُرُونَ اسْمَ اللَّهِ عَلَيْهَا. And there are other animals, we can eat, we can slaughter them, but we will not mention, it's a rule not to mention Allah's name on it. Like, where did you come up with this stuff? And then it keeps going. Iftira'an alayhi. They keep making this stuff against Allah. They keep making it up. سَيَجْزِيهِمْ بِمَا كَانُوا يَفْتَرُونَ. We will soon compensate them. We will pay them for the things they make up. And then the ayat go on describing other things that they, certain kinds of milk is only halal for girls and not for boys, or boys and not girls, all kinds of crazy stuff. So again, the question is why? Allah Azza wa Jalla is teaching us a timeless reality. A lot of you were, you grew up and you heard maybe your grandpa, grandma, your uncle say crazy things to you. If you wake up at night and you make noise, then one of your eyes is gonna stop working. Some crazy story. And then you're like, you heard it so many times when you were little. You're like, you grew up and you're passing it down to your kids. Hey, you know what happens to your eye? I'm like, so you had some crazy uncle who said something, and you know what Shaitan does? He makes that a part of your religious worldview over time. These things that were made up, over time they became so specific and so elaborate that people started saying, there are so many rules here and there's so much detail here. How can all those details be a lie? The fact that it's so elaborate must mean there's some basis to it. It can't just all be made up, So it's this elaborate lie is being highlighted, and what we're being told is eventually what's crazy. You would think this is just silliness and ignorance. Eventually these myths, you know what led to these myths? Eventually part of this mythology became, if you want to lift the curse of Allah, you have to sacrifice one of your children. And in many pagan cultures, including the Quraysh, they would actually sacrifice a child. And that's also being mentioned, safahan bi ghayri ilm, that they would kill their children safahan, out of stupidity, without knowing anything about this. Such an evil practice. What Allah is saying is this ignorance can actually become a matter of life and death and terrible evil in a society. So what can happen even in a Muslim society? What can happen is over time, the same thing happened with Bani Israel. Some of their groups, they accepted certain cultish mythologies, they accepted certain practices that have nothing to do with Allah revealed, and they added more rules and added more rules and added more rules that Allah has never talked about, but they became standard practice. So for example, I'll give you an interesting example. In South Asia, for example, there's a very strong belief that your prayer is not accepted if you don't make dua out loud after the salah. There are masajid where this is not something Allah revealed, making dua after the salah is a good thing. And there's nothing wrong with it. But they go way too far, and what happens if the person that led the prayer did not make a dua collectively after the salah was invalid. The salah was unacceptable. There are other places in South Asia where if you're praying and your head is not covered, and somebody will come and cover it for you while you're in salah, because otherwise your salah will be invalid. And so what did they do? They added rules to the rules Allah has sent. The fuqaha have exhaustively researched the permissibility of what you can and cannot wear, what falls within the acceptable or not acceptable, what are the arkan of the salah. All of that's gone. Now these mythologies have been added, and people can become so aggressive about it that actually mobs can be created. And if you question it, it can get really way out of hand. Similarly, these people, they considered animals sacred, certain animals sacred, or certain places sacred. Then what happens in our cultures is sometimes we consider people sacred. People that Allah did not reveal any authority for. Now what we do is we take history, we make certain parts of history. I'll talk to you about that in detail some other time, the idea of manifest history. Because this happened in history, it must be that Allah has blessed these and these people. And then their graves became sacred. And then their graves became worship sites. And then Muslims, people that go to Hajj, people that pray 5 times a day, are going to go to these places and beg for their du'as in front of a grave. And that's a reality in many parts of the Muslim world. Where did this come from? This is actually, Allah is diagnosing how that happened in the Quraysh. So the Muslim understands this in the Quran. And they never allow their deen to fall into these traps. We don't start creating our own halal, our own haram. We don't start creating our own rituals. The rituals have already been given. There's nothing to add to it. And so when Allah Azza wa Jalla Himself comes to over and over, once He questions them, and He says, did Allah reveal this to you? Which animal men should eat? Which animal women should eat? Where's the evidence that you got for this? Did Allah ever authorize this to you? And then He declares Himself. First He says, Halumma shuhada'akum. Bring all your experts. Let's hear where they got this from. And you know what? When you do that, you're going to get the kind of answer, those are our elders. I said it, that's the authority. Questioning it is going to get you in trouble. And this is the kind of trouble Rasulullah was inviting in the name of rescuing, for the sake of Allah, what is actually haram and what is actually halal. So I would urge you to, Surah number 6, ayahs 138 onwards. Just take note of it. Just read it mindfully. All the way to 155 or something. Keep going. And just read these ayat and think about what Allah Azza wa Jalla is saying. And it'll shift your view, in my view, of what we think about when we think about halal and haram, and how we're supposed to perceive that even in our own society. May Allah Azza wa Jalla give us clarity about His word and about His teachings and about His laws. And may Allah not make us from those who make mistakes of making things up against Allah. Barakallahu li wa lakum fil Qur'an al-Hakim wa nafa'ni wa iyyakum bil ayati wa dhikr al-Hakim.